I never imagined my life would be like this. I thought family was supposed to be a support system, a safety net. Yet, it was Christmas dinner, and my mother made the announcement. "It's time for you to move out," she said, her voice casual as if she were discussing the weather, not breaking apart the life I'd known for years. I stared at her, fork halfway to my mouth, completely stunned. "What?" My voice barely escaped my throat. "You've been living here long enough. You're 26 now, it's time to go and build your own life," she added, as if I hadn't been holding up their entire world for the past 5 years. My father didn't even glance up from his whiskey, as usual, while my older brother sat back, grinning like this was some joke. The only one not laughing was my 18-year-old sister, Sarah, who was scrolling through her phone, clearly uncomfortable but not saying anything. I set my fork down, trying to hold my composure. I pay rent here. I pay for the groceries. I cover the bills. Half of Sarah's school costs come from me. And you want me to leave? I could feel the pressure building in my chest, but I kept it cool. My mother's face softened. "We know you help, Anthony, but you need to stand on your own 2 feet. You can't live like this forever." I could barely breathe. "The moment I stop supporting you, I'm the bad guy, huh?" I knew what she was doing. The guilt trip, the manipulation. She wanted me out, sure, but only as long as I was still paying for everything. Now without me, they'd have to face their own consequences. I looked at my father, who remained silent, nursing his drink as if everything was fine, as though it had always been normal for me to pay for everything. "So what? You expect me to leave and just figure it out?" My voice wavered, though I didn't want it to. I wanted to stand tall, but the weight of it all pressed down on me. "Yes," my mother said, her voice unbothered. "It'll be better for you and for us." The next morning, I packed my things. I had spent the last few years convincing myself this was temporary, that once they got back on their feet, things would go back to how they were when I was younger, when I didn't have to be the one holding everything together. But that day never came. The way they dismissed me, the way they acted like I had been a guest all this time, it stung more than I thought it would. They hadn't once shown appreciation, not even once, and now they were tossing me out like I was the problem. It was a strange feeling, the emptiness that came from that realization. But I wasn't going to beg them to change their minds. I had already given up so much of my own future to make sure they could live comfortably, and now that they were throwing me away, I would leave without looking back. I loaded up my bags in silence, no words left to say. I paused for a moment when I saw Sarah standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You really leaving?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, my tone colder than I intended. "They made it clear I wasn't welcome here anymore." She bit her lip, shifting on her feet. There was nothing more to say. I wasn't staying because I wasn't needed. As I grabbed my bags, I heard my mother from the kitchen calling after me. "Anthony, wait." I turned to face her, my heart sinking. "What?" She hesitated, then said, "We can't do this on our own. You've always helped us. We thought maybe you could still send money for a while, just to help with the rent and utilities." I froze. She was serious. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done. You made it clear I wasn't wanted here. I'm not going to keep supporting you when you don't even appreciate what I've done for years." She looked at me, eyes wide, like she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. My father stepped in, as always, with his smug attitude. "You're being selfish, Anthony. We raised you all these years, and now you can't even help us a little?" I clenched my fists, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't owe you anything anymore." I turned and walked out of the house. I wasn't coming back. As I drove away, my thoughts raced. I had no idea where I would go next, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel responsible for anyone else. I was free. And that freedom? It tasted sweeter than anything I had ever known. I didn't look back. I ended up at my friend Ethan's apartment that night. No plan, no grand expectations, just a place to crash until I could figure out what to do next. Ethan didn't ask any questions. He just tossed me a blanket, pointed me to the couch, and let me be. Honestly, I was grateful for the silence. The whirlwind of the day still felt unreal, the way they'd tossed me out, as if I were nothing more than a burden they were finally done with. There was something about it that cut deeper than I realized. The next morning, Ethan had already left for work when I woke up, so I spent the morning scrolling through rental listings on my phone. I wasn't even sure what I could afford. All I'd known for the last few years was covering bills for a family that never thought twice about it. The thought of not having to support anyone else was overwhelming in a way, but also there was a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't have to make sure my father was still drinking his paycheck away, or that my mother wasn't burning herself out trying to make up for his lost income. It was just me now. And it felt strange, but it also felt good. I called a couple of places in the area. The first one was a tiny one-bedroom with outdated appliances, but the rent was manageable. The second was a little more expensive, but it had a small balcony with a view of the city, and that seemed worth the extra stretch. By that afternoon, I had signed a lease. Just like that. No more walking on eggshells at home, no more checking my bank account, wondering how much of my paycheck would have to disappear into someone else's pocket this time. It was a modest apartment, nothing flashy. But it was mine. For the first time in a long time, it felt like a step towards something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to play the part of the dutiful son anymore, not after the way they discarded me so easily. That evening, I sat on the floor of my new place, the box of my few belongings scattered around me. I could still feel the hollow space where the life I'd been living used to be. The guilt tried creeping in, but I pushed it back. My mom had asked me to leave. She didn't want my help anymore, so I was done. The phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my brother, Tim. "Yo, you okay?" I hadn't heard from him since the day I left. Not that it surprised me. He was 30 and still living at home, coasting through life without a care. He had his own job, sure, but as far as I could tell, he wasn't exactly pitching in the way I was. He'd always acted like it was a joke, me taking responsibility for everything. He never seemed to care about the pressure it put on me. "You okay?" Was he really asking that? The same guy who'd never lifted a finger to help? The one who would make jokes about me playing house while he lived in a basement room with no responsibilities? The guy who probably still thought he was entitled to the perks of a family that had stopped caring about me a long time ago? I shook my head and typed back, "I'm fine, just figuring things out." It wasn't worth explaining, not to him. The next few days went by quickly. I didn't speak to my parents. I didn't need to. After they kicked me out, I figured that was that. They had made it clear that I wasn't needed anymore. Why bother trying to explain myself? But as the days passed, I started hearing bits of news. Terry, a guy I worked with, had family that still kept in touch with my mom. Small town, everyone knew everyone. Apparently, my mom had picked up more shifts, trying to make up for my departure. My dad was looking for work, though no one had much faith that he'd find anything soon. My brother, still living at home, still getting by without contributing a penny. It was all a mess. And yet, I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret. I had spent my entire life helping them, making sure they were okay, even when it meant sacrificing my own future. And now, they were facing the consequences. They didn't even realize what they had until it was gone. A week passed, and I settled into my new routine. Work was good, though everything still felt like a transition. I was so used to being stressed out, managing everyone else's problems, that it took time to adjust to just managing my own. But it was a relief. I had my own space, my own time, and no one to answer to. I spent the weekend furnishing my place, picking out things that I liked, not what anyone else thought was acceptable. I wasn't worried about keeping the kitchen stocked with food for everyone else. I wasn't worried about paying for everyone's luxuries just to keep the peace. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Then, just when I thought I was moving forward, my phone rang. It was my mother. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. What did she want now? Another check-in? More guilt trips? A plea for money? Maybe? I thought about not answering. I thought about letting it go to voicemail and moving on with my day. But curiosity got the best of me. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello?" My voice was flat, though I could feel my heart rate pick up. "Anthony," she said, her voice soft, a little hesitant. I just wanted to check in on you. You okay?" I didn't know if she actually cared, or if she just wanted to feel like she was doing the right thing. Either way, I wasn't interested in her playing the concerned mother act now. Not after everything. "I'm fine, Mom," I replied. "I'm adjusting." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, as expected, she launched into her spiel about the financial difficulties. They were struggling, bills were piling up, and she thought maybe I could help out for just a little while longer. I didn't even need to think about it. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You made it clear you didn't need me. I'm not sending you any more money, not after how you treated me." She was silent for a long time. The only sound was her breathing, shallow and quick, like she didn't know how to respond. I could feel her frustration, but I wasn't going to let it sway me. She'd made her choice. Finally, she spoke again. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. We were just angry." "Yeah, I get it," I cut in. "But it's not about that anymore. You asked me to leave, so I left. I'm not your backup anymore." I hung up before she could say anything else. The rest of the night, I spent it quietly. I didn't feel satisfaction, not really. I didn't feel bad either. What I felt was something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. And maybe, for the first time, I was actually starting to feel like I was living my life for me. It wasn't long before the weight of everything really started to sink in. The first few days in my new apartment, I felt this strange mix of freedom and isolation. There were moments when the silence felt overwhelming, and I realized just how much I'd been living for others. I'd always been on edge, like a tightrope walker trying not to fall, while balancing everyone else's burdens on my shoulders. Now, I didn't have to worry about my dad getting drunk on the weekends, or my mom staying up late to catch up on paperwork. I didn't have to wonder if my brother was going to get a job, or if I'd have to cover his share of the rent again. For the first time in years, I was completely responsible for myself. It was a bittersweet feeling. I hadn't expected it to be easy. No one ever does, right? But this new life was a transition I wasn't sure I was ready for. I'd grown so used to taking care of everything that, without the constant pressure, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. Work was steady, sure, but I had no real plans. No big dreams I'd been putting off for the right time. The right time was always a lie, an excuse for my complacency. And now, it was just me. I spent the first few weeks focusing on the basics, getting into a rhythm. But then, I started to think about everything, about what I'd lost and what I'd gained. I hadn't heard from my parents since the phone call. I half expected them to call again, but they didn't. I didn't reach out either. After all, what was the point? They had made their position clear. They'd told me to leave, and I had. They hadn't even asked how I was doing, hadn't offered a single word of concern. One morning, about a month after I moved out, I ran into someone from my old neighborhood. It was a quick conversation, but it hit me hard. "Hey, Anthony," a neighbor named Carol said, giving me a friendly wave as I was walking out of the grocery store. "I heard your parents are having a tough time without you around." I froze, not sure how to react. It wasn't like I wanted to hear about their struggles, but it stung more than I expected. It wasn't the first time I'd heard about how they were coping without me, but this was different. Carol wasn't just a casual acquaintance. She was the kind of person who would talk to my mom regularly, who would check in on my dad during the week. She was in the loop. I forced a smile. "Yeah, they're fine. They'll figure it out." The words felt hollow as they left my mouth. I didn't believe it, but it didn't matter anymore. I walked away quickly, my mind racing. The guilt started to creep in, but I pushed it down. They made their choice, I reminded myself. I didn't deserve to be treated like I was disposable. But hearing about their struggles, about the way my mom had to pick up extra shifts at work, and how my dad was barely making ends, made it hit a nerve. I tried to shake it off, but for the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe that they would magically change overnight, realize their mistakes, and beg me to come back. Maybe they'd see how hard things were without me and apologize for everything. But that was a fantasy. They wouldn't change, not unless they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I wasn't the one who had to fix things anymore. They had their own mess to clean up. A week later, I got another message from my mom. This time, it wasn't a phone call. She had sent a text. "Anthony, I know things have been tough, but we really need your help with the bills. We're struggling, and I don't know how we're going to manage." My stomach twisted. This wasn't the first time she had asked for money since I left, but this text felt different. There was no "how are you?" or "I miss you" this time, just a simple plea for help. She was desperate. Part of me wanted to cave, I'll admit it. Part of me wanted to send her some money to help out, to fix things. I thought about all the times I'd done it before, how easy it was to slip back into that role of the provider, the caretaker. But I knew deep down that if I gave in now, nothing would change. She'd never learn how to stand on her own if I kept propping her up. I stared at the message for what felt like forever. Then, I typed my reply. "I'm sorry, but I can't help. You told me to leave. I'm not your backup anymore." I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness after I sent it. I knew it was the right decision, but it didn't make it easier. The next day, I got a call from Tim. "Hey man, you doing okay?" His voice was unusually soft, like he was trying to tread carefully around something. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, my tone flat. "Why?" He hesitated. "Look, Mom's freaking out. She thinks I'm going to cover the bills for her, but she's really pushing it with this. I mean, we both know she's been relying on you forever, and now that you're gone. Now that I'm gone, she's finally realizing what it takes to manage her own life." I cut him off. It's about time she learned. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Tim processing my words, but he didn't say anything. "Well," he finally muttered, "I just thought you should know. Things are tough." "Yeah, I know," I said, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. "But I'm not going back. She's on her own now." Tim didn't argue. After a few more awkward words, the conversation ended. I felt a strange emptiness after hanging up, but I didn't let myself second-guess the decision. I had spent too many years giving and getting nothing in return. It was their turn now. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with a beer in hand and my laptop open, looking at my finances. I hadn't really had the time or space to think about my own future until now. But here I was, in a place where I could finally take control of my own life. I was going to make it work. I had no choice but to make it work. One started making a list of goals. Small steps at first: get a better job, start saving more, maybe take up a hobby I'd always put off. The things I had sacrificed because I had always been too busy playing the role of the caretaker. It was time for me to start living for me. But despite all of this, a small part of me still kept wondering, would they ever truly realize how much I did for them? Would they regret what they'd done? Or would they just keep blaming me for leaving? I didn't know the answer, but I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. It wasn't my problem anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally moving forward, and it felt good. A couple of weeks passed, and the novelty of living on my own started to wear off. I'd done what I thought was the hardest part: leaving, walking away from a life I had spent years building, only to be tossed out like I was expendable. But the truth was, the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was facing what came next. I spent the next few days focused on work. It was easy to lose myself in tasks when I didn't want to think about what was going on back home. But there were moments, little flashes of quiet when I couldn't avoid it. The silence in my apartment had started to feel like a void, a space where the past lingered. And every time I looked at my phone, I half expected a message from my parents, from Tim, but none came. They were too proud to ask for help, too embarrassed to admit they'd made a mistake. So they dealt with it on their own, or at least I assumed they were. Part of me was curious, wanted to know what had happened since I left. How was my mom holding up? Was my dad still blaming everyone but himself? Was Tim finally getting his act together? I thought about reaching out, but then I remembered why I left in the first place. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. It wasn't on me to fix what they had broken. They were adults. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. Every now and then, I'd get a notification, something random, like a Facebook status from my mom or a comment from Tim, but nothing that made me feel like they were really reaching out. They were still expecting me to make things right, expecting me to return to the role I had always played. It wasn't until one night, just after dinner, that I got a text from Tim that would change everything. "Hey man, can we talk?" I sat on the couch, staring at the screen for a minute before I replied. What could he possibly want now? The last conversation we'd had been awkward, like neither of us wanted to admit how bad things had gotten. I didn't want to talk about it again. Not now, not ever. Still, I typed back. "Sure, what's up?" The message came through quickly. I need your help. I don't know who else to turn to. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't even know where to start. How had we gotten here? Tim had always been the one who got off easy, the one who never had to work hard for anything. He coasted through life, biding his time while I worked my ass off, doing everything I could to make sure the family was okay. But now, he was asking me for help? I felt my stomach tighten, but I tried to keep it together. I had to. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about him figuring it out for himself. What do you need, Tim? I typed back, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. It didn't take long for his response. Mom and Dad, they're falling apart. They won't admit it. But things are bad. They can't pay the rent, and I don't have the money to cover it. Can you just help out a little? I know I said I wouldn't ask, but I don't know what else to do. I sat back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. So they were still drowning, still pretending everything was fine, expecting someone else to fix their problems. This wasn't my mess anymore. I had left it behind. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't going to cross it. But Tim's message hit harder than I expected. The reality was, he was stuck too. He was just like, I had been living in their shadow, caught in a cycle of dependence that kept him from standing on his own. He wasn't the problem. It wasn't his fault. But I couldn't fix everything for him. I thought for a second, then typed, I can't, Tim. I'm sorry. You need to help them figure this out. I'm not coming back to save the day. I waited for what felt like an eternity before he responded. When he finally did, it wasn't what I expected. I get it, man. I don't know what to do anymore. It's hard. I could hear the frustration in his words, the same way I had felt for so long. The weight of it all was too much for him, too much for anyone. But no matter how bad it got, I couldn't go back. I couldn't fall back into that trap. We exchanged a few more messages, but they were brief and empty. He didn't ask again for money. I didn't offer. And that was the end of it. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet, in fact. There was nothing to distract me from the thought that kept nagging at me. Had I made the right choice? Should I have helped them just a little? Even if they had never appreciated what I did for them, didn't that mean they needed me now more than ever? The guilt crept in, but I shoved it down. They'd made their decision. It wasn't my fault. But despite everything, the emotional weight of it all was wearing on me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was somehow abandoning them, even if they were the ones who pushed me away. I had told myself that leaving was the only way they would ever realize how much I had sacrificed for them. But now, I wasn't so sure. I had created a life for myself, yes, but it felt incomplete, empty, almost. I was free, but at what cost? Then, one morning, just as I was about to leave for work, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something stopped me. I picked it up, unsure of what to expect. Hello? Anthony? It's Mom. I felt my stomach drop. Her voice was shaky, almost apologetic. It was the first time in a while I'd heard her like this, vulnerable, unsure. Hey Mom, what's up? I tried to keep my tone neutral, though I could feel the tension in my chest. There was a long pause on the other end, and then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I pushed you away, but I didn't realize how hard it would be without you. We need you. I need you. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't like I hadn't expected her to eventually come around. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about what would happen if they did realize their mistake. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure I could just forgive everything that had happened. The years of me carrying them, the way they discarded me so easily. I'm not coming back, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've made my choice. I'm sorry, but I can't help you anymore. You've got to find a way to do this without me. Another long silence followed, and then she spoke again, almost a whisper. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I love you, and that was it. I hung up the phone, but I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt empty, like something was missing. But for the first time in years, it wasn't my responsibility to fix. Days turned into weeks, and I began to fall into a routine. It wasn't the same kind of routine I had known before, one full of obligations, guilt, and constant second-guessing, but a new kind of normal. For the first time, it was all about me, about my life, about moving forward without looking back. I wasn't entirely free of the ghosts of the past. I didn't know if I ever would be, but I had to admit, there was something empowering about taking control of my own future. No one was depending on me. No one was silently resenting me for not doing enough. It was my time. Work had picked up a bit too. My boss had noticed the shift in my attitude, the focus I was bringing to the job. I didn't feel that constant burden of financial strain hanging over my head anymore. I wasn't working just to cover someone else's mistakes or to hold up a crumbling household. I was doing something for me. I could actually plan for the future without worrying about how much of my paycheck would disappear into the family coffers. I wasn't thriving yet, but I could see the possibility. I felt like I had options again. That night, as I sat on my couch watching an old movie, the phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number, but my gut told me it was someone from my old life. It wasn't the first time I had received a call from an unknown number, and I had learned to brace myself for whatever came next. But when I saw the name on the screen, I wasn't ready. It was my father. For a second, I debated ignoring it. What did he want now? He'd barely acknowledged my existence before I left, and now, here he was probably calling to guilt-trip me into coming back. I had made it clear that I wasn't going to be their financial crutch anymore. But something inside me clicked, and I answered. Yeah? My voice was flat, though my heart was racing. Anthony, he said, his voice rough around the edges, like he wasn't used to speaking calmly anymore. It's your father. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what he wanted. It was strange, hearing his voice like this, so different from the tone he used when I was there. He wasn't the same man who had sat across the table from me during Christmas dinner, dismissing my contributions like they meant nothing. This was a man who sounded like he had finally realized what he had lost. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he continued. I know we messed up. I know we relied on you too much, and we shouldn't have. But we need your help. Things aren't good here, Anthony. I was silent, the words sinking in. I hadn't expected this. Not from him. Not from anyone in my family. My father apologizing. Admitting that he'd been wrong? The man who had always brushed off responsibility was asking for help. I thought about it for a long time. The anger I had carried for so long, the resentment toward him, my mother, and everyone else had slowly faded, but it was still there, a small ember that hadn't quite burned out. I can't, Dad, I finally said, my voice more steady than I expected. I'm not your backup anymore. I've done enough. You need to figure it out. You've got to learn how to stand on your own. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, and for the first time it felt like he was really listening. Not just to answer, but to hear me. The silence between us stretched out, thick and heavy, like neither of us knew how to end it. You've always been a good son, he said quietly, the words slow and deliberate. I didn't realize how much I was asking of you until you were gone. I don't expect you to come back and fix everything, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this bad. I took a deep breath, trying to let it sink in. Part of me wanted to say something else, something harsher, something that would put a period on all of this. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't owe him that. I appreciate the apology, Dad, but I'm done. I need to keep moving forward. And with that, I hung up. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel relief. I just felt tired. But not the kind of tired I used to feel when I was constantly worrying about everyone else. This was the tiredness of someone who had finally, truly let go. It wasn't about holding grudges or carrying bitterness anymore. It was about me, about building something that had nothing to do with anyone else's mistakes. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and personal reflection. I had settled into the life I had created for myself, but there were still moments when I thought about them, about my family, about the people I had spent so many years caring for, only to have them turn on me when I stopped. Part of me felt guilty for cutting them off, but I didn't let it consume me. One day, just as I was getting ready to leave for work, I saw a familiar name flash across my phone, Sarah, my sister. I hadn't heard from her in a while. She'd stayed quiet after I left, never reaching out to see how I was doing, just like everyone else. I'd heard snippets of her life from mutual acquaintances, but she hadn't made an effort to contact me, even when things started getting rough at home. But now she was calling. I picked up the phone. Sarah? One asked. though part of me wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear from her. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't know who else to call. I waited. Something in her voice made my stomach churn. She sounded scared, or maybe lost. She was always the youngest, always caught between the chaos of our parents' dysfunction and my role as the one trying to keep everything together. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what to do," she said. "Mom and Dad, they can't afford the bills, and Tim won't help." "I don't want to ask, but—" I cut her off. "You want me to fix it? Like always?" "No," she said quickly. I don't know. I don't want to bother you, but I feel like I'm drowning. I can't keep pretending everything's okay." Her words hit harder than I expected. I had been avoiding thinking about them, about how they were struggling. But hearing it from her, it felt different. She wasn't asking me for money. She wasn't asking me to take care of everything. She was just reaching out. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in ages: sympathy. But that was the thing, wasn't it? I could sympathize, but I couldn't rescue them anymore. They were on their own now. "I'm sorry, Sarah," one said softly. "I can't do it anymore. I can't be the one to fix everything." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. Finally, she whispered, "I get it. I'm sorry I called." "I'm not mad at you," I said, though I wasn't sure she could tell. I need to focus on myself now. You need to figure it out too." "Yeah," she replied, her voice small. "I understand." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, feeling that strange emptiness again. But it wasn't the kind of emptiness I had known before. This was different. It was the emptiness of someone who had finally stopped running on empty. I had given so much for so long, and now I had to take care of myself. I couldn't keep filling other people's voids anymore. As much as it hurt, I knew it was the only way forward. Months had passed since that last call with Sarah, and I had settled into a rhythm I wasn't sure I'd ever find. There were no more guilt trips, no more feeling like I was holding the weight of everyone's problems on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the pressure of someone else's expectations crushing me. I focused on my career, diving into new projects and opportunities. Work was steady, but more importantly, it felt like I was making progress, not just spinning my wheels. I could take vacations without wondering if I'd come home to a stack of bills I had to pay. I was saving, something I had never done before. Little by little, I was rebuilding my life, not just in terms of finances, but emotionally too. One afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave work, I got a text. It was from Tim. "Hey, I know things have been tough, but can we talk? Mom's not doing well. She's been pretty sick. I don't know who else to turn to." For a moment, I just stared at the message. It wasn't like I'd forgotten about them, but the idea that they were reaching out again made me hesitate. I had drawn my line months ago. I had made it clear that I was done trying to fix what they had broken. But now it was something else. It was hard to ignore. My mother, sick? Tim was desperate. I could hear it in his words. And part of me wanted to be there, to help, to do what I had always done. But that part of me was fading, becoming less powerful with each day I spent building my own future. I sat down at my desk, staring at the screen. The decision wasn't simple. It never was. But I knew the answer, even if it took me a while to accept it. I couldn't fix them. Not anymore. I texted back. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't do this again. You all need to figure it out without me. I've given everything I had. I can't keep going back." I put my phone down and walked away from it. There was no need to wait for a response. I had said what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to second guess it. Not this time. The next few days passed in a haze. I went to work, did my usual routine, but something was different. The knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Was it guilt? Was it pity for my mother, for Tim, for everyone? Or was it the realization that I had done the right thing but still wasn't entirely free from their shadows? That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, a thought hit me that I hadn't fully grasped before. I had done all this because I had to. It wasn't just for them. It wasn't just about putting my family first. It was about survival. I had to get out, had to stop sacrificing myself, or I would have drowned under the weight of it all. And now I was living. I was finally living for myself. Just as I was about to turn off the lights and go to bed, my phone rang. I froze. It was my mother's number. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in months. Not directly, anyway. She hadn't tried to reach out after our last conversation. The fact that she was calling now, after everything, made me feel uneasy. I almost didn't pick up, but there was that nagging voice in the back of my mind, reminding me of all the years I spent taking care of her and the rest of the family. Part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. I answered, "Hello?" I tried to keep my voice steady, though I could hear the hesitation in it. Anthony. Her voice was shaky, smaller than I remembered, like it had been worn down by something I couldn't quite place. I know I've said some things I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to come back or to help with anything, but I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. The words hung in the air, thick with emotion. I didn't know how to respond. Proud of me? Was this an apology? Was this her way of admitting that she had been wrong? Was it too late for any of this? I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the jumble of emotions crashing through me. I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. The words felt like they were coming from someone else, but they were true. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. It had taken me a long time to let go of the resentment, but hearing her like this, vulnerable, made something in me shift. I just wish things had been different, she continued, her voice cracking. But I know I've messed up, and I'm sorry for that. I closed my eyes, taking it all in. This wasn't the mom I remembered. This wasn't the woman who had demanded everything from me, then discarded me without a second thought. This was someone who, after months of distance, was finally acknowledging the damage she had done. "You're not the only one who's messed up, Mom," I said, the words coming easier now. "But I can't fix everything. I can't keep doing what I was doing. I've got my own life now." "I know," she whispered. "I know, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm proud of you, Anthony, and I love you." The line went quiet for a few seconds. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I could breathe, like something had finally shifted. This was closure, or at least the start of it. "I love you too, Mom," I said quietly, "but I have to go now." I hung up, my fingers lingering on the screen. I didn't know what to do with what had just happened. Was it a real apology? Was it something I could believe in? Or was it just another empty moment before life went back to the way it had always been? For the first time, though, I didn't feel the need to chase the answer. I had said what I needed to say. She had said what she needed to say, and that was enough. The next day, I woke up, went to work, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could take a deep breath without the weight of the past holding me down. I still didn't know what the future would bring. I still didn't know if I would ever truly reconcile with my family. But I wasn't living for them anymore. I was living for me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. Story 2, you're whining, but why? "In any case, you never paid rent," my father sneered. "Really?" I chuckled. After that, I stopped making the mortgage payment that I had been making for years. "They are pleading with me for assistance as they face eviction." The words came out of her mouth as casually as if she were commenting on the weather, with no preamble, no trace of regret. "We'll give them your space," my mother said, cutting her bagel as thinly as possible, as if she hadn't just shoved me off a precipice without any prior notice. I was still living under their roof, at the age of 25, working full-time in a warehouse, and making a concerted effort to save money so that I could finally move out without becoming financially unstable. Every paycheck involves careful balance. Others contributed to household food, others paid bills, and some went towards savings. Then there was the water heater I had purchased last autumn, which no one seemed to remember that I had paid for. No one was being taken advantage of by me. I was just keeping quiet, silently and carefully navigating the situation. I pretended to be on borrowed land. "All right," I said, even trying to hide any discomfort with a little grin. "Tonight, I'll begin packing my belongings." I made up my mind right then. I was finished. The room wasn't really the point. Isn't it never? That chamber was only the last fragment of a wall that was collapsing, the tipping moment that destroyed the delusion I had been living under since I was a teenager. I had never truly felt at home in that house. I was only a convenience, like a machine that ran silently in the background until it broke down or became a hindrance. I went to work as normal that morning. However, a change had already occurred deep within me. I would not return, not indefinitely. I didn't tell anyone about it. Rather, I looked through rental ads over my lunch hour, discovered a little one-bedroom flat 10 minutes from my workplace, and promptly made a deposit. Rent is paid in full for 6 months. I had been putting money up for another use, maybe a car, maybe a future without the sense of exile. However, it seemed like the appropriate choice. I went home that night like I always did. My sister required the Wi-Fi for her online class, so I fixed it when it disconnected in the middle of supper and still grinned when my mother asked me to take out the trash. However, I had already left in my mind, and that evening I began methodically dismantling all of the obligations I had assumed on their behalf. For the past 18 months, I began with the grass every Saturday morning. I raked the cuttings, edged the borders, mowed it, and even reseeded the exposed areas in the spring. All of this, without request or recognition. My father had taken care of it years ago, but the responsibility had subtly moved to me as soon as I was old enough to operate the mower. No appreciation, no acknowledgement, only a presumption. I let the grass grow that weekend. I didn't touch it, but it was already tall from last week's rain. Treating it like any other day, I drove off for coffee, walking directly by the shed where the mower was kept. My father was waiting in the front garden when I got back, folded arms. He looked at the overgrown grass as if it had insulted him directly. "Have you forgotten to mow the lawn?" Already sounding irritated, he asked. I just shrugged. No, I simply wasn't in the mood. He blinked, as though he couldn't understand the idea. "Will you do it later then?" "Don't think so," I said casually as I passed him. "I'm occupied." Even though it was the tiniest insurrection, the effects were felt right away. The Wi-Fi was down once more by Sunday evening. I heard my sister yelling from her bedroom. Suddenly, her Zoom tutoring session ended. Normally, after several failures over the last year, I would have reset the router, replaced the faulty coaxial wire behind the TV, and restarted the connection. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen and pretended not to hear her anguish as I carefully spooned chili into a Tupperware container. Panicked, she shouted out, "Mom, the Wi-Fi is down once more." My mother said sharply, "I don't know how to fix this from another room." "He's where?" After letting them struggle for half an hour, I went out the door with my supper prep in hand. Nobody made a single comment. I stopped picking up my sister from school that week. I didn't warn anyone in advance. I have dealt with it almost every Tuesday and Thursday for months. I had subtly changed my personal schedule to accommodate my father's refusal to depart early and my mother's conflicting work schedule, similar to everything else I handled. After Thursday came and went, my sister was left in the school office for 2 hours before someone came to get her. The air was thick with unsaid tension, suffocating. When I walked through the door that night, "Your sister wasn't picked up by you today," my mother said. She said in an emotionless tone. "No," I said, setting down my keys. I remembered that she looked directly at me, anticipating more. Not a word more. I went into my room after passing her. I think that's when they really began to see how much I had been dealing with. However, that was just the start. The kitchen sink began to leak once more on the third day. Like an old issue that had been momentarily buried, the steady, rhythmic trickle had reappeared. The year before, I had fixed it by swapping out the defective gasket for one I had purchased. To get the right size, I even drove to a specialty hardware store across town. At the time, I didn't bring it up. I just corrected it and went about my day. Both the leak and the little puddle that was growing behind the cabinet had returned. With a roll of paper towels in hand, my father squatted next to the sink and searched the mess with a flashlight as if he were looking into a crime scene. He muttered to himself. He looked up as I passed, drinking my coffee. "Don't you know how to solve this?" he inquired. "Yes," I responded, pausing in the doorway for a moment. "Yes, I do," he continued to stare, waiting for an answer. I simply continued to walk. When dinner was done that night, I didn't tidy up. No cleaning countertops, no washing dishes. While the others sat there, acting as if they didn't see, I just stretched, got up, and walked to my room. The unsaid tension was now throbbing through the home like a live entity. I was at work on Friday when my mother's message chimed on my phone. Will you be able to pay this month's power bill? We neglected that your father's salary check is still pending and that it is due today. I took a moment to look at the wording. I had been discreetly handling last-minute invoices like that for more than a year, making sure they avoided late fines more times than I could remember. To keep their services from being terminated, I had even programmed reminders onto my own phone. Not now. I apologize, but I now have rent. Do you recall? I answered. She didn't answer. When I got home the following evening, the porch light was off. The home was quieter than ever and seemed darker than normal. The dining table was occupied by my sister. She was clearly annoyed as she flipped through her maths assignments, frantically using the incorrect end of a pencil to scratch at the page. You didn't pick up the paper from the printer? Without raising her head, she inquired. It has always been me who purchased it. I had never forgotten. Not at all. Putting my rucksack down beside the door, I said, hoped that someone else would handle it this time. She stomped out of the hallway after slamming the pencil into the table. My mother stood, observing me with a keen look, examining me as though I were a puzzle with all the pieces misplaced. I looked her in the eye and grinned, calmly, not arrogantly. Slowly, everything was falling apart. Not because I had acted in a dramatic or harsh manner. I had just taken a step back. That was their biggest source of unease. The morning of Saturday came without coffee. When my mother realized they were out of coffee grounds, I heard the sound of cupboard doors opening and slamming, followed by a low, mumbled curse. It had always been me who supplied it. I picked some bulk bags on my way home from the supermarket close to my place of employment, never given credit, replaced just now. As though it had betrayed them, they gazed at an empty coffee tin in a quiet brewer that morning. My keys were in my palm as I sat in the living room, already clothed, enjoying a bowl of cereal. I said nothing. My mother looked up at her cup, which was now empty but for hot water. "Are you leaving?" she asked. She said in an even yet curious tone. I swallowed my last spoonful and said, "Yeah." Getting to know the owner of the property, grabbing a few essentials at the property owner's word. She stiffened a little before she could ask for additional information. I simply nodded, got up, and went outside. I returned many boxes 2 hours later, heavier and much more certain of my choice. I began organizing my space that afternoon. Not quickly, not ostentatiously, but deliberately and gradually, container by container. I brought my things out and put them in the rear or trunk of my car before returning for another. All the while, I was painfully aware that they were watching me. Nobody asked me any questions. By dinner, nobody had volunteered to help. My room was crowded to half capacity. My father pretended that nothing was amiss as he flipped through the channels of television. My sister continued to stare at her phone. But my mother started slowly, trying to change the situation. After our conversation, we decided that perhaps we shouldn't let Olivia use your room just yet. I stopped, the fork still in midair. Why? She glanced at my dad, who acted as though he hadn't heard. Perhaps now isn't the greatest time, given all that's going on. I bit into it, chewed, and then swallowed. Now is just the right time. The room became silent. I added that I had already signed an agreement. By Tuesday, I will be relocating. My sister blinked. Hold on. Are you serious? I looked her in the eye. Olivia, when I wasn't home, you packed my possessions into plastic containers. I found them stacked under the staircase. So, yeah, I mean it. She didn't dispute. My mother's voice dropped to something softer. You should have spoken up. I did, I countered. You just didn't listen, because I said it with a smile. Then I resumed eating, unbothered while they sat in silence, as if the power dynamic had shifted overnight. And they were only now grasping that I meant every word, that I wouldn't be staying. By Monday evening, I was nothing but an echo in that house. Boxes sat neatly stacked beside the door, labeled in thick black marker, kitchen items, clothing, tools, assorted, electronic. Every property I had claimed as mine was already either locked in my car or sitting inside my new apartment, still barren yet bursting with new beginnings. Just a short drive away, but I took my time. No rush departure, no smashing doors. I wanted them to experience it, to identify it. The silence of the home, when I wasn't discreetly keeping things running rubbish, had still to be put out. The mailbox remained unchecked. The upstairs hallway bathroom produced that constant gurgling sound every several hours, something I had corrected 3 times previously, but not this time. I strolled past it all, an odd sensation of serenity settling within me. At one time, my father blocked my path in the kitchen. "You truly believe this is the best move?" he inquired. Arms folded, attempting to look more involved than he actually was. I went to the refrigerator and opened it. Items I bought last week made up half of the contents. I was the only one who ever ate the multi-pack of yogurt, a half-drunk jug of orange juice that usually disappeared before I could finish it. I turned to face him after grabbing a bottle of water. "Yes, for the first time in a long time," I said. His face grew stern. "Do you believe it's that simple?" "Everything, rent, utilities, etc." I held the pause just long enough to meet his gaze. Then I grinned. "For the last 12 months, I have been paying your bills," I said. "I believe I'll handle mine rather well." He didn't have an answer. He simply gazed, as though anticipating a joke that would never come. Then he turned to go upstairs. The door to my sister was open. I took a quick look into her room, which used to be mine. She had already started decorating, scattering pastel-colored couches and hanging delicate fairy lights. However, the wall-mounted bookcases and the section of plasterboard that I had fixed when she kicked a hole in it during a tantrum were still in place. She saw me glancing. "You might have just refused," she whispered, not looking at me. I gave a nod. "You may have also inquired." I continued to move. There was no longer any bitterness. The fire was extinguished long ago. What was left was something sharper, something resolute. Clarity. Officially, I left on Tuesday morning. After putting the last box in the backseat of my car, I gave the home one more glance. Not with feeling, not with sorrow, just a basic evaluation. The Wi-Fi was still down, the recycle bins were overflowing, and the porch light was still broken. Yet everything felt poetically ironic. I went into the kitchen and taped one sheet of paper to the refrigerator before I left. The phrases were straightforward and truthful, printed in dark ink. No extra words, no feeling. Obligations I took care of that you probably never noticed. Each and every week, mow the lawn. Regularly picked up the trash and recyclables. And when 5 utility bills were overdue, I paid them. Over 10, fixed the Wi-Fi router. Over 9 months, around $1,200 was spent on food. 32 times he drove Olivia home from school, cleaned up after supper almost every night, and changed the porch light bulbs 3 times. $200 was donated to Dad's auto repair. I added a last sentence. Kept this house functioning while being treated like an outsider at the bottom. I wish you success in handling everything. I'm finally moving out to live in my own space as a guest. Then, for the final time, I shut the door behind me. I didn't get any calls the first day. Messages began to come in by the second. My mother comes first. A missed phone call and a text message. "Hello, there is a problem with the internet. Can you recall the router's login credentials?" Then my dad, trying to seem indifferent but failing to hide his annoyance. "Where do you store the lawnmower's key?" I paid them both no attention. By Friday, the messages had become confused and guilt-tripping. Olivia texted me only one word. "Really?" I reasoned that they thought I would give in and ultimately return to assist. As soon as it became inconvenient, perhaps they believed I was only expressing a point and not going away for good. They had made a mistake. In the meantime, I was finally feeling like I belonged in my flat. I set up shelves, picked out my own cookware, and turned up the music to my preferred volume. The quiet I had craved was no longer oppressive. It was sincere, undemanding, and tranquil. I had the impression that everyone had finally ceased expecting me to do anything. My mother phoned again a week later. I responded this time. She sounded frustrated and strained in her voice. "You didn't have to depart in that manner." I said nothing, allowing her to go on. She said, "We didn't realize how much you were handling. The rubbish, the bills. I didn't realize it was all your fault." "Yes," I gave an equal response. "I am aware." We were silent for a long time. Olivia is struggling with school pickups. She has trouble riding the bus, and both of us work. I didn't respond. It never occurred to us that everything would fall apart so quickly. You never saw what was keeping everything together, which is why. After another pause, she tried to gather herself before saying, "Well, I hope you're happy now." She was unable to notice my smile. I always was, and I still am. I had the impression in the days that followed that I was looking at my former life through a pane of glass, something I could see but not touch. I disregarded Olivia's last text, and she never texted me again. My dad never got back to me. Too proud to do so, probably. My mother, on the other hand, sometimes sent texts, each with a tentative tone. I hope everything is okay on your end. This place is a little hectic. She never stated outright that they missed me, just suggested that there was a change in the feeling of the house. Even though I never responded, I continued to hear from neighbors and people we had in common. Overgrowth had taken over the garden. Olivia had to walk home in the rain after missing a few more pickups. It took them half a day to remember to pay the bill after the water supply was turned off, and the front porch light kept flickering, seemingly in anguish. The little, routine tasks that they had always taken care of themselves overwhelmed them. The same ones I'd handled with ease. The odd thing is that I didn't feel like I had won. Their fight had left them without any sense of fulfillment or residual animosity. I was no longer even angry. I just had to go on. I got used to my new schedule. I began cooking for myself. Nothing fancy, just basic food. However, they were more delicious than anything I had ever eaten in that home. They belonged to me, not because the components were superior. I also had better sleep. The floors outside my door no longer squeak at strange hours. No sudden knocks requesting that I do a short errand. No hidden expectations weighing me down all the time. Nothing except silence. A real, unbroken silence. When I got home from work late, about a week and a half after I left, I discovered a little package stuck beneath the door of my apartment. My name was written in my mother's handwriting across the front, with no sender information. It read within one-lined notebook paper sheet, precisely folded at the top. We were unaware that the list below was different from mine, in that it was haphazardly written down, lacked bullet points, and was unstructured. The internet, the groceries, the leaking sink, the porch light problem, the garbage, Olivia's school rides, and the emptiness. We never treated you like a son. One final statement read at the end. I apologize. That was it. No cries for me to come back. No hollow pledges to make changes. Only acknowledgement. And for the first time since leaving, I sensed a change in myself rather than in them. There was no closure. Not quite. But maybe it was sufficient. I never responded. Not because I didn't care. I felt a lot, if anything. After leaving that letter on my kitchen counter for hours, I read it again the following morning and unfolded and folded it. It thought about what it meant, but words on paper couldn't make up for years of being ignored. The times I was only acknowledged when something needed to be fixed or paid for were not undone by a hastily written list. At last, they had started to take notice of the gap I created. It was obvious, but I was no longer in a position to fill it. Olivia reportedly finally learned how to ride the bus alone by the second week, but she missed it twice and had to wait in the rain once more. My mom had engaged a lawn care company. My father unintentionally disconnected the entire modem while trying to reset the Wi-Fi, which turned off the house alarm and left their smart TV inoperable for a full day. Like someone relearning to walk after losing the ability to use their legs, they were adjusting slowly and awkwardly. And me? Without their expectations, I was flourishing. I began to do things that I had never before permitted myself to do. I bought a bookshelf because I wanted one, not because I had to. I made it a personal ritual to treat myself to a meal out every Friday. I even signed up for a weekend woodworking class, something I had put off for years because there was always someone in need of help, a ride, or money. I hadn't even realized how much weight I had been carrying until it was no longer my responsibility, but the weight had been lifted. While tidying up my inbox one evening, I discovered a calendar alert that I had set up months prior. Check the registration of Dad's car, in case he runs out of money again. I stared at it for a while before deciding to delete it. I just let out my breath for the first time that evening while lounging on my small balcony with my legs propped up on a plastic chair. I was not expecting an unavoidable catastrophe. I didn't hear a voice calling out to me. Not that I was bracing myself for another request, under the guise of a small favor. Once overwhelming, the silence no longer seemed empty. It was peaceful. I haven't gone back, not even for visits, not even for celebration. The calls ceased. Perhaps they feel ashamed. Perhaps they're simply drained. Or perhaps they finally recognized that I wasn't just an occupant in that household. I was the structure holding everything in place. And when the foundation disappears, everything begins to collapse. The note I had taped to the refrigerator is probably still hanging there. Or maybe they removed it. The way someone discards an object that stirs too much guilt to keep looking at. Regardless, it had already served its purpose. Farewell. Story 3. You were a burden forever. Before interrupting me, my parents sneered. I said, "Then die with your favorite son." He left them alone and broke, it turns out. My mother's voice, tinged with icy rage and a feeling of closure, echoes through the doorway. I refrained from arguing. I just walked away after turning around. I walked off their porch and felt the night wind on my face. I feel the weight of years of emotional rejection pressing down on me. I wasn't going to pass out, though. I wouldn't allow them to see my breakdown. Not now. In my own family, I had always been the outsider, the one who was easily forgotten, the person they went to when they had a problem to solve, but the one who was ignored when there was a reason to rejoice. The one person who could do no wrong was my older brother, Louis. Favorite? The endearing tale of achievement. Or so they thought. Their world revolved around him all the time. Me? The disappointment was me. One who was never able to live up to their expectations. Finally, it was said out loud. I had been interrupted by my own mother. I arrived to my car, got in, and sat down. Nobody shed a tear. No rage flared. Rather, a peculiar, silent calmness began to creep in. Like, this could have been the finest thing that ever happened to me. I turned on the ignition and took off. I didn't turn around. I didn't know where I was going. I had spent years trying my hardest to get their favor, which was never really possible. I had never stopped to consider what my life may be like without them. However, I had a realization while I was walking through the streets, which I knew by heart. It wasn't a catastrophe. It was a liberation. My parents only became connected with me when it benefited them throughout the years. Do you need assistance paying a past due bill? I received the call. Some repairs around the house are needed. Their guy was me. Do you want someone to listen? While they commended Louis on all of his accomplishments, I was suddenly welcomed. However, genuine concern and a genuine connection were never provided. I ought to have anticipated it. When my mother's disappointment turned into something more acerbic, it was the first red flag: disdain. It seemed subtle at first. A mocking voice, a remark about how Louis was accomplishing something important while my life was going nowhere. Then things worsened. I no longer received invitations. Social media would tell me about Louis' birthday celebration, which I was unaware of. Only last week was the last blow delivered. My mother called me after I had just concluded my training shift. She spoke in an extremely pleasant voice, the type she reserved for situations in which she wanted a favor. "Hello, my love." In that too soft tone, she started. "We only require a minor favor." I was aware of the direction this was taking. She clarified, "We're helping Louis with the down payment for a new house. We're a little short, though, only a few thousand. It would be a great favor for your brother." My hand gripped the phone more tightly. "You mean Louis, the six-figure earner who never lends a hand to any of you?" She sighed in disappointment, as though I were being irrational. "It's not the same. He's got a future. He's becoming settled. He requires consistency. You don't have any obligations like that, though." All of a sudden, everything clicked. They weren't only partial to him. They really thought he was worth investing on. I was only the backup, the safety net. When I refused, she revealed who she really was. I hardly had time to finish my statement before she started insulting me, calling me a failure, greedy, and ungrateful. Words that were unavoidable. And now, a week later, she was shouting for me to leave from her front door, and I complied with their request for the first time. I turned to go. I was up the entire night. In that small flat, I laid on my bed. Amidst the strange yet serene calm, eyes were riveted to the ceiling. No more calls, no more coercive entreaties. Unless they required a favor, they would no longer feel invisible. I anticipated feeling numb, broken maybe. However, I sensed something else instead. It's like being weightless. As like I had released a weight I had been carrying for too long. I had made up my mind by dawn. I was completely done, completed at last. First, stop texting. No more waiting for a non-existent version of them. For the first time in my memory, I refused to take their leftovers anymore. I turned my phone off. It was something I had never done before. I was constantly anticipating the next one. Would you please do us a favor? A message? However, it is no longer the case. I diverted my attention to making something that was exclusively mine. A life free of their constraints. Taking care of my finances was the first step. I had been paying money whenever they requested for years, putting my own financial security at risk in order to satisfy them. That was the end of it. For the first time, I planned around my own requirements, reviewed my balances, and determined what I truly had to work with. I put my all into my work and took on more hours because I had goals, not because they asked me to. Real objectives for me only. I also got back in touch with friends I had neglected for too long. Friends, co-workers, individuals who had showed me care and loyalty, but had been cast aside every time my family dragged me back in. I called an old acquaintance, named Fred first. "I thought you had vanished from the world, dude." He laughed as he spoke. "Where have you been?" "Managing some family disarray. I'm done with all that now, but I did acknowledge it." He just said good without asking for specifics. It's about time, and that was the start of something new. I spent the following 3 weeks trying to put my life back together. Waiting to be called or included was no longer the focus of my days. I went out more, worked out more frequently, and made plans that weren't continuously derailed by my parents' last-minute emergencies. I felt like I was actually living for the first time in years. That seemed to be the end of it. However, a month later, a call rang on my phone. They had that number. It was my mom, the same mom who had commanded me to go out and shut the door. I gazed at the display. Something was odd. Workplace. I had a gut instinct about what it could be. I let it ring for a few seconds and considered turning it down outright, but something inside me told me that this wasn't another attempt at manipulation. So I replied. She spoke in a shaky, unsteady voice. Not at all like the cold tone she had previously employed. "Please, Bruce. We truly need your assistance." I said nothing. Then, in the distance, I heard another voice. My dad. His voice was unpolished, unsure, and oddly foreign. He said it was Louis. Bruce, he let us down. We are unsure of what to do. It nearly made me chuckle. Louis, it was, of course. Their joy and pride. The one they trusted with everything. The son they chose instead of me. And now he left them behind. Still, I said nothing. Let the silence drag on. My mother began sobbing. "We gave him everything, Bruce. Every single thing. And he took it all, emptied our accounts, talked us into co-signing a loan, then disappeared. He won't answer. He moved to another state. He's just gone." I blinked. Louis, the golden boy, the one who supposedly could never fail, vanished. And honestly, I couldn't decide if I was shocked or if I'd expected this all along. In hindsight, Louis had always been persuasive, charming in a sneaky kind of way. He understood just how to manipulate things to his profit, allowing others to clean up the repercussions. What I never thought was that my parents would eventually become his victim. My dad cleared his throat, a sound I knew as hesitant. He loathed relying on anybody, especially me, but the strain had plainly destroyed his dignity. Bruce were suffering, were behind on payments for the home, the vehicle, everything. We might lose it everything. I relaxed slightly, allowing the weight of his revelation rest over me. For so long, they treated me like a spare component, a utility only recognized when needed. And now, after putting me aside, they'd returned begging me to bail them out. The irony was crushing. I inhaled deeply and spoke with an even tone. "I'm not going to help you." There was a long delay. Then my mother's voice shattered over the line, fragile and frantic. "What? What do you say? This is not possible. Bruce, we're your parents. You were reared by us." I let out a breath. "No, Louis was raised by you, Mum. You just tolerated me, and now you expect me to repair the harm he caused?" My dad said something to himself, too delicate to capture. I no longer cared, though. You made a decision. Calm and straightforward, I said. You did it every time. You now have to deal with the consequences since you selected him. My mom started weeping. My dad let out a tirade of irate remarks. I hung up the phone after tuning everything out. I felt something I had never felt before after that. Real release. I prepared myself for shame. For years, they had instilled in me the idea that loyalty included sacrificing oneself. Putting their needs ahead of mine was a requirement of being family. I would have allowed their worry to overwhelm me and caused me to doubt my boundaries if I had ever given in to their pressure. Not this time, though. This time, I just experienced clarity. After shutting off my phone, I reclined in my chair and gazed up at the ceiling. Louis had been pampered and supported all my life, while I struggled to make ends meet with what little they had left over. They never once thought that their beloved son would turn on them, but he had now. I ignored the deluge of voicemails and missed calls from my parents, as well as messages from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, and continued with my day. Every attempt to pull me back in made me feel like I was being irrational. I didn't recognize the number that sent me a message that night. Louis was the one. I'm feeling pleased. You think you're better than this? After staring at it, I grinned. No sorrow, no apology, no accountability, traditional Louis. He didn't feel bad about his actions. It was only that I wasn't helping to tidy up after him. In my life, for the first time, I appreciated the strength of an action. I typed a single word, yes, and he was blocked. A knock on my door woke me up the next morning. I let out a sigh. I put on a shirt since I already knew who it was. As planned, I went over and opened it. My parents appeared broken as they stood there. They appeared to have aged 10 years in a single night. My mom's eyes were swollen and red. Normally so confident, my father seems disturbed, even scared. I rested my weight on the doorframe. Crossed arms. What are you looking for? My mom attempted to put her hand on my arm. I took a step back. Please, Bruce. We were unaware. We never imagined that Louis would harm us in this way. I laughed without humor. Didn't you think? Really? I said. Do you mean the same Louis who has never had to deal with the consequences of his actions? The person who has always been accustomed to taking advantage of others. My dad's jaw tightened. He whispered that this was not the time for lectures. I gazed at them. So why have you come here? I inquired. Nothing. Simply be silent. Since they secretly had no valid justification. Not one that involves me, anyhow. They hadn't arrived to make amends or take responsibility for their involvement in any of this. They had no other options, therefore they were there. I inhaled deeply. I've always hoped that you'll treat me with the same kind of concern that you always shown for him. I shook my head slightly, but now I can see it. I was never really a family. I was only the backup in case of emergency. My mother's eyes filled with tears once more. My father looked away without a word. I took a deep breath and stood up. Return. Take care of it yourself. I'm done. And I shut the door before any of them could answer. I listened to the other viewpoint while remaining still. My mother was crying quietly, and I could hear it. My dad undoubtedly swore at me for finally saying no, as he muttered something under his breath. I didn't grab the handle, though. The impulse didn't come to me. Minutes went by. They grew quieter. An automobile door slammed. Then there was quiet. I exhaled. They had vanished. And for the first time in my life, I had really cut them off. Completely for good. And I meant what I said. After making a fresh cup of coffee, I went back to the kitchen and took a seat at the table. A typical morning, I don't feel guilty. No internal argument, just serene. They would work things out. When Louis messed things up, they always did. They could give their extended relatives a call. I twisted the narrative such that I appeared to be the antagonist. They could downsize and sell their home. Perhaps they would at last understand that the golden lad they had devoted their entire lives to had abandoned them. But I was no longer burdened by that. It was the first time in my life. I was free, and I had no intention of returning. The next several days were peculiar, eerily silent. No more calls that are laden with remorse. No desperate texts. No burden weighing me down emotionally. I was expecting remorse to creep in and make me feel really terrible about finally breaking the connection. However, it never appeared. I felt light instead. In years, for the first time. Trying to keep their world together wasn't wearing me out. To make money, I wasn't busting my back. In the end, I would give away. I wasn't glued to my phone, fearing yet another request that was actually a demand. I took advantage of the fact that I was at last living for myself. I gave my all to my work because I wanted to, not because I had to. I took advantage of chances and once turned them down. I resumed my workout since I was so emotionally spent. While I was buried beneath it, I dropped something. Issue. I reestablished relationships with people I had previously ignored. Nice faces. Relationships that I was unable to sustain while juggling my parents' never-ending chaos. And I started to consider my future for the first time in my life. Not merely getting through one crisis after another. Then I suddenly received a message. My aunt gave it to me. The older sister of my mother heard what transpired. She wrote, "I understand," she said. "I can see why you did that. You're not incorrect." Startled, I blinked. Regarding my parents' partiality, my extended family had never been involved, had never expressed an opinion, and had always been impartial. Why now then? I hesitated before answering. I appreciate it, but why? Tell me this. It was several minutes before she responded. Because your parents are claiming that you owe them money and that you abandoned them. However, I am aware that's untrue. Something in me stirred as I gazed at her message. Not sadness or rage, only relief. Because at last someone in the family realized what was truly going on and they didn't hold it against me for leaving. My parents had crafted the narrative to portray me as the unappreciative, unruly one, the perpetual failure who could never measure up to Louis. So I read her words again and allowed them to linger inside of me for years. Despite everything, they continued to adhere to the same worn-out storyline. However, it was collapsing this time. I responded to the message. What are they telling people exactly? Her response was prompt. They claim that despite everything they allegedly did for you, you abandoned them and left them in a difficult situation. That you lack gratitude, are cold, and are self-centered. I chuckled to myself. That was classic them. And do people actually believe that? I typed her answer didn't come as fast. Some do, but not all. Louis burned a lot of bridges. More people are starting to see your parents for who they truly are. That last part hit deeper than I expected. For years, it had felt like I was screaming into a void, trying to convince myself and everyone else that I wasn't the villain in my own family's drama. And now, finally, people were seeing the reality. Thanks for telling me, I wrote. But I don't care what they say anymore. And for once in my life, that was completely true. I set my phone down and took a breath. For most of my life, I lived in their shadow. Always the spare. Always the one expected to fix everything, even after I cut them off. Part of me still waited for guilt to creep in, for that tug of doubt to pull me back. Not this time, though. No more. I had spent my entire existence believing family was supposed to mean something, that you stick around no matter what. But family isn't supposed to feel like a prison. It shouldn't drain you until you're hollow. And that's what they had done. But I wasn't their backup anymore. I wasn't the one they could rely on when everything else fell apart. I wasn't theirs, and that fact was driving them mad. A few days later, they tried again. It started with a message from my mom. "Bruce, please talk to us. We're hurting. We need you." Family helps each other. I disregarded it. Hours later, my dad phoned. I let the voicemail go. Then more text arrived. More frantic attempts to lure me back. "Bruce, we could lose the house if we can't obtain some aid. Please. We have no one else." And from my dad. "So you think you're above us now that you can just turn your back on your own parents after everything we done for you?" I stared at the computer and shook my head. I assumed that was all they did for me, such as ignoring me for the most of my childhood, while Louis received all the praise and assistance, labeled me a failure, and took advantage of me both financially and emotionally as they centered their universe on their golden boy. It became more apparent the more I gazed at those letters. They didn't apologize for the way they handled me. All they could think about was how much they missed having me around. Forgiveness was not what they sought. They were trying to find a rescue, but they were failing. My dad left me another message when I got up the next morning. His voice was irate, barely holding it together. "This is your final opportunity, Bruce. You are done if you do not assist us." We'll let everyone know that you abandoned us to suffer. You'll be by yourself. Do you truly want that? I chuckled. I had already spent the majority of my life alone, as far as they were concerned anyhow. They believed that cutting me off would cause me pain, but I had already left. Without thinking, I erased the voicemail. That seemed to be the end of it, that they would at last acknowledge the consequences of their own decisions. Another notice from an unknown number showed up 72 hours later. Bruce? It's me. We must talk to each other. Louis. I stared for a long time at the message. He was the last person I expected to hear from, of all. I thought about not answering at first, but my curiosity won out. What is it about? His response came very immediately. I did make a mistake. Although I acknowledge my errors, I truly need your help. I gave a quick breath. This was obviously not a sincere apology. This was an effort to make things better. I decided to ignore it. Another text message showed up a few hours later. Do you think you're better than me now, Louis? That you can merely watch our parents suffer from a distance? You are pitiful. The actual Louis was there. I wasn't going to run in to save him the instant he realized. The phony humility vanished. I gave myself a sly smile, gave him a small shake of my head, and blocked his number. I felt lighter than I had in years when I woke up the next morning. No worry, no anticipation of another guilt trip, no weight on my chest. At last, I was free. I'd let them determine my worth for far too long. I had tried for years to prove that I was as deserving of respect and affection as Louis. However, the truth was that they had never needed to be validated. I had been sufficient all along. All they could do was not recognize. After 7 days, everything happened suddenly. There was one final message. It came from my mom this time. Bruce. To be honest, I'm at a loss for words. I never thought you would leave us in this manner. We depended on you. Your family is us. But I guess you don't care about it. I carefully read the words, anticipating a response. Anger, grief, and regret. But there was only resolve, nothing else. For years, I longed for an apology that would never be offered in order for them to recognize my value and acknowledge me at last. However, they would never, and everything was okay. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't require anything from them anymore. I then composed my last reply. Long ago, you made up your mind. You have no choice but to live with it now. Her number 2 was blocked by me. I never heard from them again after that. Maybe they thought I would come back someday and ask for forgiveness. Perhaps they still thought of me as the helpless, pathetic kid who would stop at nothing to get their favor. However, I was no longer that person. My life thrived without them in the months that followed. My career flourished. For the first time in years, I took a trip. I got back in touch with old acquaintances and formed deep connections, not ones compelled by duty, but ones that were freely chosen and, most importantly, meaningful. For the first time, I felt completely free.